everyone. My name is Pavel, and I create VFX for People Can Fly. In the past year or two, me and my colleagues, we work on the Vertex Animation textures pipeline. We explored that because we wanted to find a way how we can transfer complex geometry from Houdini into the game engine. For example, we try to use cloth tearing, rigid bodies, destruction, and some detailed fluid splashes. And during this experiment, we found it's not only cheap in terms of performance, but you can also achieve some really good results with these techniques. So in this presentation, I'd like to show you a few practical examples of looped animation that we took from Houdini, and maybe you can find the usage in your projects. There will be some concept work, but we're still trying to improve on some of the techniques. So if you have any input after the presentation, feel free to just approach us and we can have a chat. So to give you an idea how the VATs work, in this video, Houdini is allowing us to move the vertices on all axes, which is the X, Y, Z, and Houdini is actually saving the position of those axes for the grid on the left for all directions. However, the grid on the right, it's only going up and down, and Houdini saves the height coordinates only to the blue channel. So usually, if you want to animate it on bones and skeletal meshes, you're probably going to have this on the CPU. However, with the VAT method, you can unload from your CPU and put it in the GPU instead. So this flag is a very simple VAT soft body animation with a loopable flag in the game engine. And because of its simplicity, we wanted to try if we might be able to transfer the animation into VATs and make it behave exactly like we have a simulation in Houdini. So the whole process was straightforward, and after this test, we started experimenting with more complex ideas, trying to implement it in Niagara using dynamic parameters into our workflow allowed us to experiment with a few concept ideas that we had in mind. So this animation is actually a loopable 100 frames, and it has two textures that come with it, which is the position and rotation map that we actually take from Houdini, and the size of those textures is 900 by 100. So as you can see, this is the Houdini graph for that flag. I think it's quite simple. The first part over there is just a mesh creation where I actually take the grid, I subtract the shape to just create a little bit more interesting geometry. Then we're having a remesh. In the remesh, I'm just trying to create geometry that's going to be a little bit better for the cloth simulation. And then I'm just running this through the Vellum solver, adding some pop wind and some noise animation. Then we go into the Make Loop node. Make Loop is actually part of the Side Effects Labs plugins, but I'm going to talk about this in the next few slides. And then I'm just having the Export node, which I'm going to plug into the VAT node in the out section of Houdini. So here's another example. The idea is exactly the same as with the flag, but the animation is actually on a little bit larger scale, and there are some parameters in Niagara. So the animation can use a frame offset to create a random start point of the animation on all pieces, and you can also slow it down slightly or speed it up to make it difficult to spot the similarities on that animation. And next, let's have a look at the setup. So again, I think it's quite simple. First, we're starting with a grid. On that section there, I'm actually creating the position for the holes and for the pinpoints that I'm going to use. I'm using Boolean, I'm using Remesh to create very simple, better mesh for the cloth simulation. And inside of the Vellum solver, I'm just having a pop wind to add some random animation for the cloth and the direction for the wind as well. So I think this technique might be really good if you have a lot of instances in a scene and you just want to randomize them, which you can use the dynamic parameter in Niagara. And when exporting VATs, you need to have a Side Effects Labs plugin installed, as you will need to access the VATs node. Overall, the Side Effects Labs plugin, it contains many useful nodes, especially for us in games, but I noticed that a lot of people in film start using them as well. The next step is to add a VAT node into the out section of Houdini. So it's actually there. So once you activate the plugin, you go to shells and you try and find the side effects lab. You can, it's gonna appear on your shells, and then you're gonna have an icon which is gonna be update toolset. If you don't have this installed, you can just click it and install it. Your Houdini is gonna restart, and then all the side effects labs nodes starting to appear in your version. So once you activate it, you just go into the out section. You can press tab and call the vertex animation textures. You plug in your export node into the sub path, and if you're doing VATs for the first time, you can just export with the default settings and see if you'll be able to import that into the game engine. So this is the last simple example I want to show you, how you can create plans which you can add gameplay elements to it. So I've added some sports VFX, some gradient, emissive color, and also randomized the animation speed and scale over time in Niagara. We could create simple logic and make the plans to animate faster based on the player position. Same with the sports. As the player gets closer, we could release the sports and damage the player while increasing the intensity of that gradient emissive. And here's the setup for this. The workflow overall is very similar to the previous examples. The whole animation fits into 100 frames, which you can offset and randomize in Niagara with a dynamic parameter. In the following slides, Christian will talk about the example that he prepared for this presentation, and this will be a little bit more complicated setup with a few ideas what you could achieve with the soft body techniques.
So, hi everyone. At first I want to mention that it's my first presentation, so I am a bit stressed, but let's start. I want to share with you some techniques that we developed in the last time. So yeah, hi, I'm Christian, and now I want to show you how we can extend the techniques that Pavel just showed to you. And basically with the VAT textures, you can also export baked destruction simulations from Houdini, and the baked simulation is an excellent approach, but with it comes a lot of limitations like low flexibility and repetitiveness, because since the entire movement and geometry is saved in textures, it looks the same every time. So we are looking at a more flexible solution that would allow to incorporate the randomness and adaptation to different scenarios. And we come with a solution to use VAT textures only at the beginning stage of destruction, where we basically build the geometry using it. And I want to play this video actually right now. The entire simulation is driven by particle system. That's what you see here. This is a Niagara particle system. Using such approach with particles opened many new doors on our way to experiment and try to push things further. And now I want to show you how the effect was born from our explorations of this technique. Basically, we're using a sphere projection technique where each piece of a fractured geometry is built from a sphere that is projected on that particular mesh. I can play the video actually. Sorry. And here you can see. Basically, it looks like this, that we have a sphere that is marked as a purple color here. And this is basically the geometry of this sphere projected on a target piece, which is represented by the green color here. And you can see that by just doing it, we are able to take the vertices from a sphere, and each chunk will have the same count of vertices. So with this we will be able to use the VAT technique that Pavel showed you before. So And the information how far the vertex should travel in this direction that you can see is represented by the yellow arrow is basically stored in the VAT texture. Yeah, sorry, but because it's kind of hard for me to describe this, but basically we are wrapping each piece of a fractured geometry with a sphere. So we can say at the end that the entire object is reproduced from just one sphere. Basically, when you do such a things, you almost always use a different static meshes for every piece of this fractured geometry. But with this approach, you will have only one static mesh imported to the engine, which is just a sphere. So that's the core idea of this this technique. And here you can see that the direct projection doesn't produce a perfect result. You can basically see sorry, to play again. You can basically see that the direct projection from a sphere works this way, that we basically calculate the minimum distance to the target geometry, and you can see the video will play in a while. These issues here, when we have the hard angles between the edges, and we were looking to a solution how to solve that, because it was kind of a challenge to rebuild that, and we've come with a solution. You can see it here. We have a first step when we have a direct projection on the target. This is where we are attacking the target from a sphere geometry. Then we have a second step, which is basically it works this way, that we have basically it works this way that we're not projecting directly from sphere to a target piece. We're doing something like intermediate projection, where we have the step 2 basically describes it here. We first project it directly, then scale it up, smooth the geometry out a little bit, and then we have the better point to reproduce this piece again. So you can see that the third final step is like a much more accurate reproduction. When you compare the green, the geometry that is marked by green color to this final piece from step 3, you can see that we can say basically that we achieved a good result. And here you can see how with a single sphere we can iterate on every piece of the geometry. It's kind of hard to grasp when you look at it probably, but you can imagine that every piece represented here, it's a part of a fractured mesh. So basically when you fracture a mesh to 10 pieces, sorry, but each piece will be represented by this single fragment, and we basically iterate on this fractured object. We iterate on every piece, and inside this loop we're using just a single sphere input that is projected on this target piece that is currently in the iteration. So yeah, that's how it works. You can see how flexible the sphere is. That, sorry, because I didn't play the video. You can see that we're using just a sphere with about 642 vertices, and we are able to reproduce every piece here almost perfectly. Of course, you can see, for example, here, it doesn't quite match perfectly, but you know, of course, with this technique comes a lot of limitations, but it can be your another arsenal to do such things. And basically, that's how the process of reproducing structure of fractured geometry looks like. Once we have specific frame of VAT animation assigned to each particle, the last step is to move each particle to the correct position using Houdini data. It works basically, I don't know if you can see that, but we have red dots here. These are basically particles. Sorry, because it's quite kind of, probably because of the light. And it works this way. It works this way that we basically fracture this mesh in Houdini, and then we assigned each frame of the VAT textures to every particle by index. And yeah, the question is how we reproduce this geometry inside Niagara. We basically have a really simple tool. We are exporting the vector data from Houdini. In HLS, we convert this to HLSL, and in Niagara we are able to reproduce basically position of each piece. You can see that we can match then the entire geometry. So it's kind of awesome because in fact these chunks here, these pieces are spheres, like I showed you before. Yeah, and why particles? Yeah, because basically with baked destructions comes a lot of limitations. Like for example, when you simulate something inside Houdini, you basically have, for example, simulation prepared on the flat ground, and you can't use it basically in different scenarios. Like for example, when you have something like stairs or uneven terrain. And we are looking for a solution where when we can simulate at runtime. And with Niagara, we only basically care about this reproduction at the beginning, and then everything simulates at real time. So we have collisions and other things like that.
Can you speak to the microphone?
Oh, sorry, guys. Can you heard what I was talking about previously?
You're pointing out to your microphone.
Yeah, but sorry. It's my first talk, but have you heard what I was talking previously, or it was just?
We heard it, but it's not gonna record.
Okay. Sorry, guys. And yeah, here you can see basically that's all the asset you need to reproduce this kind of fractured geometry in Niagara, or you can even do it in other scenarios. But basically, here you can see that we have a material instance that Pavel was talking about previously. It uses the VAT soft body function in it, and this is like the core idea here. This what you can see here, it's just a sphere. So we use this sphere, and here is a position texture where with this texture we can deform each vertex of this sphere to match the topology of the chunks that I was showing you in the previous slide. So basically, almost when you look like how other people approach this kind of situation is that they will import each piece probably as a separated static mesh, and here we have just a sphere. Yeah. And now I want to make a brief breakdown of this effect. And yeah, to create a lightning effect, we can just randomly match particles to pairs of two, where one particle is a source and the other is the target. Then we can basically calculate the difference between them as well as the distance. So basically when we subtract the vector of a target piece and the source piece and the target piece, we will have the direction from one to another, and then we are using it to basically adapt dynamically this red line, which is basically a sprite here. And of course, we also, with this distance calculated, we are able to stretch it dynamically between them. So you can see that they are almost like attached, stick together. And yeah, so we have also some kind of sparks here. This is like a simple detection when this target piece receives the lightning. Then we can spawn some particles, and the force, which is what is interesting here, that the force of this green particles is applied this way, that the direction of its force is basically pushed toward the source piece. So that's kind of cool solution here. And after we have the object reproduction, we add additional effect like debris, dust, and grass. These are just standard particles with some forces to add the feeling of depth and ensure it doesn't look, empty. I made them this color here to just exaggerate that we have this kind of different layers, because basically, I will go to the next slide. Here you can see the final effect in its glory. There's kind of a lot of data sharing in this emitter, because if you would go inside Niagara and see how it looks like, we have about 10 emitters there. And yeah, we're thinking how we can approach that, because we need to send data from one emitter to the others. And basically, it works this way, that we have one emitter that is main parent emitter, and from this, the main parent emitter, other emitters are like fetching data. So this way we can, for example, spawn particles like this lightning or anything else on the specific events. And here you can see one of the prototypes of this effect on an enemy. At the core, these are just a couple of spheres with proper setup, as I showed you, placed in specific positions. And yeah, sorry guys, I was a little nervous. It was my first time, but after seeing all of this, yeah, pay attention to every rock in the games, because what looks like a rock may be actually something else in practice. So that's all from me. Now Pavel will talk about different VAT methods and its usage. Thanks.
Okay, look, that example, I think was complicated, to be fair, and when we actually showed the technique to our team, they kind of needed a couple hours for us to just go through it and explain what's happening. So me and Christian will be hanging around here, and after this presentation, if you want to have a chat, we can just walk you through it and answer any questions that you might have. So another VAT technique is dynamic remeshing. Soft bodies were the first that we looked into, and it seems like the easiest method to experiment with. Then we decided to create some splashes in Houdini using the dynamic remeshing method. Here we've got a couple simulations, and we just wanted to recreate a liquid-like behavior in the game engine. So VATs actually were perfect for this. As we wanted this effect to be cheap in terms of performance, we found that splashes might be a good choice for various systems that we have in the project. We could use it for some water splashes and any lava effect, and in places that actually require you to have a liquid-like behavior. We try to make our Houdini setups clean in case someone else has to open it and work with it. So on the left, I create the velocities for the splashes, and actually those actually control the whole splashes. Then I plug it into the DOP network, and the last part is just the engine export. Everything is controlled with the level of details in the movement and how it looks. It's only managed with one node, and that's actually this attribute vote, which is in the velocity section. So here is the footage taken directly from the game engine with isolated splashes, and I also recolored them. Hopefully this will give you an idea of what's achievable with this VAT method, and in the next slide I will talk a little bit more about some concepts and how you can combine different VAT methods into a single effect. So this is another example that Christian have done, combining whoops. So this is the another example that Christian done for the presentation, combining various VAT methods and also taking the tools from Houdini, KineFX, and different VAT techniques. So this is a complex example, so we won't be going into many details. The bat animation, we use the KineFX, is designed to have a procedural system in mind in case you want to swap the bat for any other creature, and KineFX will update. Usually you would need bones and the rig for the 3D model, but in this case you can export the bat using the soft body with the frame ranges, and you can recreate the animation using dynamic parameters in Niagara.
Can you show previous slide for the scan? One more time.
Sorry.
With the notes, yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, if you want those slides, actually, you can message me. I'm gonna leave my email address, and I'm happy to just send it to you if you want to recreate it. I mean, the whole idea behind this presentation is to recreate very simple example like just a flag, see if you can actually import it into game engine, and from there you have an idea how to work with VATs, and you can experiment with the different methods. And so for the web, we use the clustering technique, which is soft body, and I think it was just a really good choice for this. And we decided then what frames of the animation to play in Niagara, so we can match our timing with the gameplay elements. And here's the final example. We're just trying to create like a hive behavior, and you can spawn a lot of them. You can see there is a bunch of offsets as well, which just gonna, hide the similarities between the animation. So in my opinion, currently the VATS methods are amazing, but it comes with a drawback. So the first one is lack of LODs. The textures cannot be compressed, and the meshes need the exact number of verts all the time. The only way at the moment to create another set of mesh and the texture would be to... So if you're having just one texture and one mesh, you're just having one LOD. So to create other LODs, you have to go back to Houdini, come up with a lower resolution of the vertices and the texture size, and that's how you can switch between LODs. So we're hoping that maybe you're gonna take the flag example, and maybe next year we're gonna meet in one mesh. You're just having one LOD. So to create other LODs, you have to go back to Houdini, come up with a lower resolution of the vertices and the texture size, and that's how you can switch between LODs. So we're hoping that maybe you're gonna take the flag example, and maybe next year we're gonna meet here, and you're gonna give us a couple ideas about the LODs or something that you discovered. Next is the amount of vertices and frames that we use. So the more the vertices you have, the bigger the texture is gonna be, and also it also depends how many frames you have in your animation. The initial setup actually took us some time and some time investment, so I think our leads just decided that to give us to us. We took quite amount of time to discover a couple things and come up with a couple R&D examples. So if you're planning to implement the VATs into your projects, just make sure you dedicate enough time for the research. But on the flip side, VATs allow us to create complex visuals from Houdini to the game engine and use them in interesting ways. Also, the ability to unload animation, some of the animation from the CPU to the GPU was the big deal. When we've been starting, we actually used a lot of learning materials from online, and here's the guide by Simon. I believe he still works at the Side Effects. It was a good starting point if you want to create your first setup. Simon in his guide goes through it and explains what to pay attention when exporting and importing VAT assets to the game engine. I think it was just very easy tutorial to follow that will help you understand how the VAT works. The projects were included if you want to take a look what's happening under the hood. And yeah, just go through the tutorial, go through the lessons, and hopefully you will manage to import, because most people having a problem with importing assets into the Unreal Engine. So again, if you're gonna just try it and you won't be able to import a single flag into game engine, feel free to send me an email and I can walk you through. Thank you so much for attending this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it and you've learned a couple tips and tricks. Feel free to ask me anything after the presentation, or maybe just try using, or maybe you just tried using VATs in the past without success, and if you would like to learn more or want us to walk you through the process, you can just approach us and we can have a chat. Do you have any questions?
Sorry if you mentioned it before, but do you compress the VAT texture in the engine, or how does that work? Does it cause problems, janky animations, stuff like that?
So we don't compress.
Have you tried compressing, see if it's acceptable?
It won't work because they come up into the engine as a HDR or vertex displacement textures, so they can't be really compressed. I think maybe there is a way, we just have not discovered it, but to be honest, we're just very deep in those VATs and we're going to be exploring them in the future. But at the moment, to create a bit more optimized version, you have to go back to Houdini, reduce your vert count, and you're going to have a smaller texture. Or just reduce the animations, for example. You can just do that, and that way you can have it a little bit more optimized. But to be honest, those textures are quite small. The flag one has about 100 frames. The texture was 900 by 100, so it's just tiny. I think it depends what you're using for, to be honest.
Hi, thank you for your talk. About the compression, is that linear interpolation between keyframes, or did you try to use some kind of Bezier interpolation in between just to reduce the keyframes? And the second question is, do you load this texture with the level, or you have some kind of a soft reference when you address the VFX event and then you load the texture?
Okay, so I'm just going to answer the second one because I think I already forgot about one. So hold to the mic because you're going to just repeat the first question if you can. No, you just import those textures normally like you would import anything else.
Not import, but load it in memory.
I'm sorry, I don't think I understand.
Like streaming, do you stream it? Do you load it in memory with the level, or when you actually spawn the particle?
I think you can do it in both ways, to be honest. So,
because you cannot use MIP maps, you cannot because it's not power of 2, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you cannot compress it somehow. So, like, is it always in memory, those textures? So you're limited in the amount of unique VFX that you're gonna use on this level?
I don't think we went that deep with this, to be fair. But in terms of MIP maps and stuff, you can probably put them into a big atlas at the end of the project and atlas it together, I'd imagine, with all the other assets that you might have in the game.
And keep in memory all the time, right?
I think so. I'm not sure. I'll have to get back to you at some point.
No problem.
Yeah. Well, sorry, what was the first question?
The first question was, is that linear interpolation in between of...
Got it. Right. So what you do, and you're just changing the display frames in the VAT material. So you plug in your dynamic parameter, and with dynamic parameter, you can just change it to curves, and you can animate it on the curves instead. So you can have a little bit more interesting animation. Also with the... Go ahead.
Because yeah, I forgot actually about it, but the way how it actually works is when you have this VAT function, yeah, that I was previously showing you guys, it's like you can have the one piece and the second one on the second frame. So you basically have two coordinates of this texture, with 1 and 2, and we basically make a layer between them. And we connect this output to the word position offset, and that's basically it. If it answers your question.
Yeah, but did you try any more complex interpolation in between, so you will have those like more smooth interpolation, not like without stepping, so you can use less keyframes and less rows.
Yeah, but you are talking about an animation itself, a blending, that it stops, just we have a sharp stop at animation, or you are talking about like shape blending, shape smoothing between different...
lerpen in between frames, so you can use less frames, but the animation itself will be same smooth.
Oh yeah, sorry, I get it. It's basically with VAT3 that was incorporated some time ago. You have this automatically. Yeah, you can just click a checkbox that you want to blend between frames, and yeah, it looks like this. You can basically export animation at 24 frames, and you have basically blending between specific frames. So that's
Probably you have to reinvent the mute maps for VAT textures, and it will just keep some frames on a distance, and that will be analog of mute maps.
Yeah, we're just gonna wait a year. You're gonna come back to us, and we're gonna have a chat. Right. Another idea for the dynamic stuff, for the dynamic parameters, is that imagine you have a bird, for example, and animator gave you animated bird with a different animation. So you have like a takeoff, flight, and then a landing, for example. And you have this, let's say, on 100 frame in dynamic parameter. You can decide with the curve what kind of frames range you want to play at the moment. So the next step for us will be probably creating like a little bit more intelligent system, like some animals or maybe birds. Look, I get it. I mean, VATs are a little bit painful. But to be fair, once you just import 1 or 2 meshes into the engine, you will get an idea. But please, start with the soft bodies. This is like the simplest way that you can start with. If you're going to start with dynamic remeshing, you're just going to give up. And if you're going to meet me next year, you're going to punch me. So start with the soft bodies. All right, thank you so much. Feel free to catch me afterwards.